So it's very nice to be here this morning with my lovely young friend Emma. I am Tiffanie Darke. I have written Whatever Happened to Generation X, and I am a card-carrying 40-something Generation Xer. And in the course of the book, I reached out to lots of people to try and understand where as a generation I and all my peer group were now. And I think as part of that, we needed to understand where millennials were and where boomers were. So Emma, you wrote a fantastic book, Control, Alt, Delete, and you run a very successful blog, Girl Lost in the City. And you've become something of a spokeswoman for the millennial generation. Now,
although it's hard to speak on behalf of a whole massive generation.
Yes.
Yes.
Let's just get that out of the way here. We're going to be massively subjective on this whole thing, but there we are. That's journalism for you. Everybody's very mean about millennials all the time, I feel. What do you see are the main accusations that your age group faces?
Yeah, so the media as a whole, if you Google millennials, you'll get millennials are lazy, millennials are entitled. We are famously really hard to manage in the workplace because we're just rebelling against the system. And I think people like to label us as being that way, but I think there's been a lot recently that's come kind of against that. Like lots of millennials have kind of come out and actually said, these are the reasons why we're not. And I don't know, it's a really interesting argument because I like to understand why people think that.
Well, from a point of view of someone who is older than you and looking down from that age on you, and I'm not a boomer, I'm a Generation X, and we'll get into that in a minute. But the reason why people say you're like this is because I think there were three very formative things that happened in a millennial's life. First of all, the education philosophy at the time for you guys was all must have prizes. So generally speaking, when millennials were educated, they were overpraised for everything they did and they weren't taught how to deal with failure. That is actually a fundamental change in the education system now. My kids are very much taught about the positive aspects of failure. They do lots of peer-to-peer marking, and I think there's a shift now in the way that children are educated, which wasn't there when you guys were brought up. The second thing that happened was, as you came of age, 9/11 happened, and the world, which had been a very comfy place through the 90s, suddenly seemed like a scary place. And that was, I think, just as you guys were, coming through puberty and coming into consciousness, if you like. And then the third thing that happened, which was absolutely devastating, is as you were all leaving school and going into the workplace, 2008, massive economic crash.
The recession.
When
everyone was graduating,
Yeah, and no jobs. So, first of all, I think you were made to feel insecure. And secondly, I don't think there was the opportunity for you out there that we had. Is that fair?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think definitely that we came into the time where there was a massive recession. There weren't any jobs. I think the stat globally is like £1 trillion worth of debt we had from university. And we've all got so much debt hanging over us that going into any workplace is going to be really scary because we've already got that overhang of so much money. And then I guess we've seen our parents acquire property and work up a ladder and have a job in a traditional sense for like 40 years in some cases, whereas it was really unstable for us, and the idea of getting a house was kind of out there for us.
Yeah, a mirage. So with that in mind, when I went back and looked at the 90s and the things that influenced us, Generation X, I was really surprised by how good we had it. First of all, most of us benefited from free higher education. Secondly, housing was just about within our grasp. I mean, I remember when I first came to London and my first job, I shared a flat with a girlfriend. It was a bedsit, and I remember it was like 350 quid a month between two of us, and we all just ate egg banjos and nicked the loo roll from work, and that was great. We spent all our money going out clubbing and buying cocktails and stuff, and that was the thing about the 90s. It was a very joyful time. There was lots of hedonism going on. It was post-rave. Britpop was kicking off. And the thing that was really brilliant was there was masses of opportunity, particularly for women. So I was a woman working in the media. all those media organisations realised they were massively understaffed when it came to women. Half that audience were women, but all the bosses were male. So literally, I remember one advertising executive friend of mine saying all she had to do was walk in the door in a pair of trainers and talk about the club she'd been to the night before, and they just flung another pay rise at her. I mean, it was like a crazy time.
The good old days
The
of
good
the
old
media.
days of media.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all completely without jobs now, by the way. Anyway, that's another story. And so there was a lot of possibility that was about, and a lot of joyfulness. And I don't think that we suffer from the same insecurity that you guys suffer from. I mean, I think you're a very anxious person.
Yeah, no, I think our age group, our generation as a whole, anxiety is on the rise. Yeah, I mean, we've spoken about this before personally. Like, I worry about the tiniest things, and I think I actually don't feel as anxious about being anxious, if that makes sense, since I feel like our generation online are very good at talking about our problems, and that's one thing that I do kind of credit us for, is we will be really honest about what we're going through. We don't try and hide anything, and I think the conversations about anxiety and mental health across the board are helping us and not hindering us.
So what do you do when you feel anxious about something? How do you cope with it?
I guess I make sure that I'm looking after myself in lots of ways. So learning how to switch off, because I think the nature of my career, but also kind of having lots of different jobs and maybe freelancing or having like a side hustle, or like having lots of different things that you do, life and work really merge. And I think that's something that's maybe on the rise.
If I ask that to a Generation X person, I know exactly what they'd say.
They'd say clubbing and
they'd
going
say
out
open
and
a
doing
bottle
drugs.
of wine.
Yes, yeah.
And I think that is something that we know how to do that you guys don't know how to do. We know how to let go and experience joy. And joy is a really important part of life. And it doesn't have to be out clubbing and getting off your head, but it's the sort of metaphorical version of putting your hands in the air on the dance floor. It's finding that simple moment in, I don't know, it might be a view on the top of a mountain, or it might be finishing a run, or, you know, it might be at the bottom of a bottle of wine with a girlfriend telling lots of, you know, kind of crazy stories.
So did you find it quite easy to switch off when, because obviously you've had really high-powered, you know, very important roles in the media, like being an editor of a huge magazine. Would you find that you could deal with any stress and anxiety in an easy way?
No, I remember when I got my first big job and I was stressed out beyond belief and I didn't know how to deal with it. And I thought, shit, I better go and see a shrink. So I phoned up another friend of mine who I also knew had a high-powered job, and I phoned her and I said, what do I do? Have you got a number? Who do I see? And she was really good. She said, why don't you just try exercising first? And I went off and I spent some of my dollars on a personal trainer, and I stayed with that for about 8 years, and I found that worked for me.
Because I think our generation look up to Generation X for some of these answers, because I feel that the role models of just women in particular, that for me in that age group of how do you do it? Because we're, I think, struggling a little bit in some ways.
Alex James talks about, he's got a good phrase in the book, he's the bassist from Blur, and I said, you know, how do you cope? He's got 5 kids, and he says, I'm head down, arse up, pedalling hard. And I think that maybe this is something that our generation inherited from the boomers, which was that whole keep buggering on. You know, we work really hard. We play hard, but we work really hard as well. I think we've got a really strong work ethic. And I think sometimes the things that are levelled at millennials, one of the things is you guys have got no staying power. If something doesn't suit you, you just move on. I wouldn't say you're shirkers, but you know, you definitely work in a different way from us. Douglas Copeland told me when I put this to him, Douglas Copeland wrote the original Generation X novel. He said he's a fine artist as well, so he runs a studio and he has quite a lot of millennials that come into his studio, and he said they'll be working on a project, Tuesday's the deadline, they'll be all up against it, going around the clock. Monday, they'll be like, where's Guy? And they'll look around and Guy, you know, the millennial assistant hasn't turned up, so they get phoning, Guy, where are you? And he'd be like, oh, I'm in the park, walking my dog, taking some me time. That's the sort of apocryphal story that goes around about millennials and work.
Yeah, I don't know, because I kind of think that stereotype is being perpetuated. But I don't know, because like millennials are going to make up like 75% of the workforce in like 2020 or 2025. Like we are going to be like literally ruling the workplace in the next 10 years. So I think the way we work needs to be understood in a way that is taking it seriously, because when it comes to hierarchy and working up a ladder and working at an organisation for years and years and years, now that that's out of the window, and we work differently because we grew up just being able to Google something. And that is sad that we can't in a pub go, who was that actress who was in that film? Because we can just Google it.
We can't remember, so don't worry.
But that's because we do want things instantly, but that's kind of made us break the rules, start our own companies. You know, newspapers are closing down, things like Airbnb are on the rise. It's kind of, I think we find the industry quite exciting because we've got the internet, we know how to use it in ways that are a bit stealthy at times. But yeah, I don't know, I think the millennial myth of being really kind of all over the place and really lazy isn't true.
I remember you saying to me that you left a job recently with a very well-established, with a publishing company, because you didn't think that they would make it in the digital age. And I remember being properly shocked that, first of all, we all think that, but then we don't chuck in the job. But that also you had the chutzpah to think, I know more than you, I'm out of here, I know how to do it better. I'm going to do it myself better than you as a massive organisation can do it on your own.
Yeah, but I think on the whole it's more that I personally don't feel like I fit into a massive organisation because I've got too many ideas that I just want to execute. And I think that's the really exciting thing, is you don't have to wait for the permission for someone to go, okay, you can do that, you can just go and do it yourself. So whether or not things succeed or they don't, I just think that I just want to try things and mess them up, and I'd rather do that on my own time and in my own kind of digital space than on behalf of a big company. I feel like they could probably do that better.
I wonder if that makes you more anxious because you're so determined that you can go and do these things on your own without the umbrella of an organisation or a you know, a safety net, if you like, that you're constantly having to do things on your own to your own beliefs, and that's quite nerve-wracking, right?
It is, but then I feel that I do a lot of lecturing at the Condé Nast College, which is really exciting. I get to, as I learn, pass that on to the younger generation, which is great, because I think they look to me of like, oh, you've messed that up, but what can I learn from that? Or you've done really well in that, how can I learn from that? So I constantly share what I'm doing because I think that can only help other people. But also, you know, getting a book deal with Penguin Random House from my blog means that I'm always going to have the ties to these big, important organisations, which I really respect. I really respect Condé Nast for the 100 years of what they've done in the space. I also really respect publishers. So I think that it's just straddling both. Like I don't kind of want to turn my back on either world, but I feel that working on by yourself and being your own company, especially for women, is so empowering. The fact that I don't have to ask anyone's permission to do what I'm doing is for me a bit of a feminist act.
But you are a success story and not everyone is as successful as you. So tell me, as a Generation X manager in a big corporation with some millennials working for me who are driving me mad with their attitude, how should I adjust my management style?
I think from what I've researched, and also I ask a lot of questions, do a lot of polls, do a lot of surveys on millennial workers, I feel that it is about communication, and it is about just making sure that they feel heard. It's not about completely changing what you want to do. After all, you're the boss, you're the one with the experience and all the years of working there, but it's just making sure that the workplace isn't getting too stale. And I think that, you know, the 9 to 5 is quite retro. It was literally around the time of the Industrial Revolution. It was because of electricity and the water supply and the daylight hours and the fact that you couldn't get in touch with your colleagues if you weren't there at 9 till 5. So I think, you know, flexibility is a huge need and desire for millennials. They just want to be slightly more flexible because they're on their phone all the time, and it's kind of easy to feel slightly overworked and underemployed, or I don't know, just taken advantage of if you're on your phone all the time.
Yes.
Why do you have to be at a set time in the office?
That's not a problem confined to millennials. I mean, we as Generation X definitely feel that. Actually, if I look at my parents' generation, if I look at the boomers, they have very good digital habits. They're not constantly checking their Instagram feeds or updating their Facebook. They're very happy to leave their phone at home for a day, partly because they don't work, but also they don't, they're better disciplined around it. So I think, and this is a good area for us to get into, for me, when 24/7 working, and actually it wasn't the smartphone for me, it was the BlackBerry when that came in. The Crackberry, that was the most emancipating thing, I thought, because it was around the first time I was having my first child. And I could answer my emails from the playground and my boss didn't know where I was. It was absolutely brilliant. I could do 2 things at once. And I thought, my God, for our parents, it was the pill that was the most emancipating thing for women. For me, it's going to be the BlackBerry. And to an extent, that is true. And you can now weave motherhood and a career together with technology. But the downside of that is that we just don't switch off. That's why Netflix is so popular now, because it's the only moment which you put your phone down.
Yeah.
And I remember actually when you and I first met, and we talked about working and where your office was, or whatever, and we were in a kind of bar, and you had your laptop, and you said, my laptop's my most important thing to me, I'm constantly plugged in, and it is my work and it is my life, and you don't see a difference between work and life. And I think that's corrosive and dangerous. I do see a difference between work and life. I can't always put the practice in that I need to separate work and life, but you do have to make delineations, I think.
I have so many friends who are millennials, by the way, that totally agree with you. I don't know if it's just our age group. I think you fall into the camp of either wanting this sort of seamless life of is this work, is this not? I personally really like that, and I like the idea that I can just be anywhere with my laptop in my bag, with a rucksack on, doing whatever.
Anytime.
Yeah, literally, but I love what I do, so I guess that's different. But I agree, I totally agree. I think it's a problem that I can't switch off. I've written about it a lot. I think that burnout is a real threat, but then it also sounds like Generation X were on the brink of a lot of burning out. If you were burning that candle at both ends, like you were hinting that you were.
There was the party burnout, and now there's the parenting burnout. Yeah, so burnout is a big thing for us, and there were lots of moments where peers and friends and myself had to just kind of go, whoa, time out. Definitely the partying could get too much, and some people managed to stop and some people didn't, and it was bad. Some people have very successfully managed to continue their partying career on a part-time basis, as I'm constantly reminded on my social feed, and are very happy with that and that find the balance. But, drugs and partying are dangerous things. And actually the photographer Amelia Trubridge talks about it in the book, where she said one Christmas she had to drive herself up to a rehab centre and take control of herself and the rest of her life, because she didn't like the way she saw everything around her developing. And there was definitely a point in the 90s. The 90s was like a sort of blizzard of cocaine, all that kind of Britpop, Cool Britannia thing. It just got completely out of hand. And I think the sort of ecstasy-fueled rave years, which had some really good values in them, were lost to the cocaine years, which cocaine is not a drug that promotes good values. And I wonder if a lot of the mass consumption and greed that epitomised 2000 to 2008 wasn't driven a bit by that sensibility.
I was wondering if, you were saying that you maybe didn't get as anxious as us lot because you could go out and let your hair down, party, whatever, maybe a bit more. Do you think that's because you didn't have everyone's life on a phone to compare yourself to? Because I think that the anxiety that comes from our generation as well is
FOMO.
You would go out and you probably didn't know what everyone else was doing. You're probably just like, I'm going to go to a club and have a good night and whatever. Whereas I think social media comparison is a big issue, and it is. I think a lot of people get very anxious. Yeah. And the studies, especially with really young girls, which really makes me sad to see, that the rise of anxiety is because they have little self-worth because of what they see on a screen. I think that's
so the lesson that we have to teach our kids and those beneath us is, when I say beneath I mean younger than us, is you have to value what it is that you have Yeah, and you're absolutely right. There is a horrible moment every time you check your social media feed when you see all these people having much better lives than you, doing much better things.
Yeah, you can have a great day until you see something.
Well, I didn't have as good a day as them. Yeah, exactly. I think that is a really toxic thing that's creeping in now. I remember actually going to a festival at the beginning of the noughties, and I can't remember the band that was playing, but anyway, we were at the front of the festival. I was with some guy, and you know, it was amazing headliner acts, and the sun was going down, and you were just thinking, this is absolutely brilliant. And then this guy next to me got a text from someone who was in Ibiza on the floor at Space, and he was like, oh no, it's kicking off there. And I remember that moment very clearly and thinking, I feel depleted now.
Yeah.
When I was having such a good time. And I think that was the beginning of it. And you're right, it is getting out of hand now because there isn't that ability to appreciate what you've got and value it.
That's a really good example because you're in the moment enjoying yourself and then suddenly just like takes you out of your real, like
Bubble.
the reality of that situation.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think that's really important.
Can we talk about parenting and motherhood?
Yes, because in the book, there's a bit where you asked me about motherhood, and I admit that I see Generation X doing it all, and I find that very inspiring, but at the same time, it makes me very nervous about being a mum, and I wonder if millennials are having kids later and later, especially in the city. I don't know if it's the same kind of on the outskirts of the UK, maybe it's easier to afford a house or whatever, but I look at Generation X, you guys are having kids maybe later on the whole, is that right?
Yeah, not by design. I think that we were very much, that whole Sex and the City phenomenon at the end of the 90s, the beginning of the noughties, celebrated independent, economically independent, socially independent womanhood. And we just ran around during that time really championing the idea that, you know, women could have a successful, independent life, and children and marriage just didn't really feature too highly in that because we were having such a good time. And then what happened was we suddenly got to the end of our 30s and started to crest our 40s, and you know, then you're at the sort of alarm end of your fertility years, but you hadn't met the guy. And there was a lot of sort of accusations leveled at us that we were too busy concentrating on our career, or you know, too busy running around looking after ourselves than we took our eye off the ball for motherhood.
Are we quite similar in that respect then?
Well, you haven't learned the lesson if you're not looking, because lots of us got left on the shelf. Lots of us didn't find somebody to make babies with till it was too late or not at all. The rise in solo motherhood now is an example of that. But also I think it's going back to that thing that we were saying before about being happy with what you've got. Our expectations for a husband, Generation X's expectations for a husband, were off the scale. You know, he had to be solvent, he had to be sexy, he had to have a career, you know, he had to be all these things. And of course those men just don't exist. There is no perfect man. And also, where does a man fit into a successful independent woman's life when she doesn't need him? She doesn't need, what does she need him for? And I think that has been a massive problem in our generation. And I think it's less so for you guys actually, because I think you've figured out more about what men are for. I see all these millennial men in their lumberjack shirts with their tattoos, barbecuing meat. That's a massive cliche, by the way, but that's my one. And think, God, yeah, they know all about manhood. But I think you are a little bit more equal, and I think that equality in our generation wasn't quite there. We didn't respect men enough. There was a phase in the 90s of laddism, which was men kind of bucking against modernity, trying to find a role for themselves. It was all, you know, the Gallagher brothers and Chris Evans and Reeves and Mortimer, Loaded magazine. And those men were sexy, but they reached burnout, and then the women tried to be like them and ladettes, and then the Spice Girls came along and said girl power, and we thought we could all just be separate and go our separate ways. But actually there was a big thing in my peer group of women not finding the right man, and those that wanted to have children perhaps not achieving it. So if there's one thing that you girls should learn, is you should not leave it too late. There is never a right time to have a kid. Okay, never. You can make a million excuses not to have a child. But anyway, you said to me that you looked at the sort of struggle that we were having it is a total struggle and you don't know the half of it. And thought, I don't want that. And
right now. But I think it's interesting when you say about expectation, because I think as a generation, our expectation is equality. It is literally, yes, that is what it should be. It should be, you know, I'm not saying half and half, it's obviously not that clean cut, life doesn't fall like that, but when it comes to balancing a life together with someone, I totally expect that. And also things like, you know, learning that there is a paternity leave, and having more women in the workplace high up so they can make the decision, so that you're not being interviewed and they're quizzing you about when you're going to have a baby. I find that utterly so wrong and offensive that someone would even hint if I had a boyfriend, because are you going to have a baby in the next few years? And so, yeah, when it comes to expectations, I want to be free. And
your men get that half and half equality thing, and millennial men do get that, but there are lots of Generation X men for whom that's had to be a steep learning curve that they haven't quite got to the top of.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they've had to feel maybe that they have had to sacrifice something in a way.
Well, they don't maybe do enough. They don't do enough for Generation X mums. But, I mean, I think it's increasingly changing, and also the workplace thing is really interesting. So there were a couple of influential boomer women in my industry who I remember about 5 or 6 years ago made a massive fuss about the maternity leave allowances. When we were young and we were bringing up our children, we didn't get a year off work. And we're pushing back on it, saying it was corrosive to business and corrosive to the workplace, which for me is so unreconstructive, so unprogressive. And I'm really lucky as a mother of 3 kids that when women come in and work for me, I can totally pay it forward for them. I like to think that I am a really good person to work for if you've got kids, because I respect flexible working massively. I know the pressures that all that you guys would be, they're under. And I would like to think that I make all the allowances necessary, because there were certain women that did it for me in some capacity, and it was a lifeline.
Yeah, the paying it forward bit is really prominent in your book as well. It feels like that generation are interested in learning more about the difference between all of them. I
mean, personally, I feel like cannon fodder now. I feel like I'm cannon fodder in this massive experiment on having it all, which I hope you don't feel like you can have it all, because I think that's a massive misnomer that our generation grew up with, the having it all generation. You can't have it all. If you do have it all, then you have no time for yourself. You have very stressful life situations. Sometimes you can go a whole night without sleeping at all because you're looking after children, and then you're having to go to work the next day, and it just seems completely wrong way to live your life. I think you've got to get rid of this idea that you can have it all. You've got to place values on things that you've got to say some things are more important than others.
So I interviewed Amanda Ducadney recently for my podcast, who I think is amazing. She said that something that really struck a chord with me, that you can have it all, but just not all at the same time. So she was saying that something will always get a hit. So if her kids are going through a tough time, more than usual at school, for example, the focus is on that. If the business is needing her, she will step that up, and actually she can't go on as many nights out with her husband, but she also has to give attention to her husband. Like, it kind of is a bit of a put your ball where it's needed, the priority of it all.
You can have a work life, a family life and a social life, but you can only have 2 of the 3 at any one time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got flexible working arrangements, and increasingly people do, then that works. I tell you, the thing that just drives me mad the whole time is the childcare situation, is, nannies and au pairs letting you down and having to patch that together whilst, maintaining a front at work. Oh, there are so many difficult things that you have to stitch together to try and make that life happen. But the payback is, you can have a successful work life and be a mum. And I wonder, the interesting thing will be, is when our kids are grown up or a bit older, will they look back on these years and think, I wish my mum had been around more? Or will they look at us and think, my mum and dad? Or will they look at us and think, I really respect my mum and dad for the job that they do and, you know, doing the things that they felt were right? I don't know. They might all hate us. In a lunatic asylum. Anyway, we'll see. It is a massive social experiment. But let's just talk about boomers for a bit, because I think there's quite a lot of anger between millennials and boomers, and millennials feel very upset that boomers have economically made a play for themselves and not them. They're hanging on to all the housing, they're triple locking their pensions, they're claiming their free heating allowance, and you guys are having to pay for it, and us as well. I think that Generation X has a real role in bridging that gap between millennials and boomers right now, because boomers aren't budging. They're not going to give anything up for you guys. What can we do to help you?
I think it's true. I just feel like it's more communication, like I was saying before. Like, I don't think it's kind of us and them. I don't know. I don't know about that one.
I think it's our role to educate the generation above us, and also to make policies that prepare the generation below us for a better life, which I don't think boomers thought. I think boomers always thought society was going to progress, so they should vote in self-interest. So they've always voted in for things that makes life better for them personally. I don't think as a Generation X thinks that now. I think it thinks forward about the environment. I think it thinks forward about housing. I think it thinks forward about work-life balance and parenting leave and so on. And I think that's a fundamental difference between us and the generation above. We are thinking about you. We're thinking about our kids, the generation below you. And we've got more of a long-term plan.
Yeah.
And I think that we can teach you things. I think we can teach you to be more happy. You should come dancing with me.
Yeah, well, I interviewed Miranda Sawyer recently, the music journalist. She's amazing. She ended the podcast episode with just being like, "You need to get out more."
Yeah.
And I just loved her for that. She was just like, "Just go out." She was like, "Even if you don't have any money, just go out."
Yeah.
Because I don't go out anymore. And I don't know if millennials on the whole, I think we like staying in and lighting candles.
Oh, you guys are such fogies, you really are.
I know. So yes, I think we can learn so much from you. And seeing as all the boomers are starting to retire and the workplace is kind of literally Generation X and millennials kind of taking over, this is the time to learn from each other.
This is the time. Emma, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
For talking to me. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for asking me to be interviewed for your book as well.